Morning, everyone. Was your week? New maths. Today, I hope to get your applications finally to show something maybe a little bit more applicable to what you need, what you are interested in. And if you have any questions on the theoretical parts of the lecture, vectors, real sets, any other topics that we discussed. Just to remind you what we talked about previous time, we talked about vectors. In terms of linear algebra, vector is just a bunch of numbers. You have an array of numbers, can be any number of numbers. Eventually people get even to infinite lists of numbers, but we will not get there to infinite spaces, the dimensional spaces. So we are talking about just list of numbers, x1, x2, x3, we will call it vector. Then we will add vectors, subtract vectors. We discussed what dot product is, by scalars. And then we got two norms, which are lenses of the vector in our case. Later it will be a little bit more generalizable, not only a lens of the vector, because lens you can define only in 2 or 3 dimensional space or 1 dimensional space. But when it gets to higher dimensional spaces, lens kind of makes less sense a little bit. But we will talk about that as well when we get to determinants and that kind of stuff. So to get unit vector, you just divide by length of the vector. You get every coordinate divided by the same number. And then you get unit vector. And then we started to talk about geometrical meaning of dot product. So if you have any questions before that, let me know right now. If you have anything that was not clear about dot products. All right. So technically, dot product tells you how much 2 different vectors overlap, in a sense. So this would work perfectly if one of the vectors would be unity vector, but it's true mostly for most regular vectors. Okay, if you're doing dot product between vectors, if they are the same vector, you're practically getting every element squared. Right, so you get some of the, you kind of generalizing the length, and this will be square of the length, right? When you're summing all the values squared. But when they have some angle between them, then you have something which is called projection, and projection is you putting perpendicular from one vector on another vector, and you're measuring length of that segment on another vector, which is projection, this vector onto this vector, right? So this is what projection is. So how we connect these two things? So we can connect them only in 2 or 3 dimensional spaces, but we will generalize same notion for higher dimensional spaces. So projection is easy to show in 2 dimensions, like here. So you have, let's say, projection of vector y onto vector x. Okay, and this will be that projection. This will be vector in that direction, or just that length in that direction. Now you can project x on y. All right, so you will do kind of line here, which will be get here 90 degrees angle. So this type of vector will be projection of x on y. So you can project each one on each other one. All right. Any questions on that? What projection is? Now, when they are looking in the same direction, then the projection of one vector into another vector is the vector itself, okay, because they sit on the same direction. Now, trigonometrically, this length equals to y norm, which is length of that vector y, times cosine of theta. Now, for 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions, you know what theta is, what angle is. But what is angle for 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions, 55 dimensions? Like what it even means, having angle between 2 vectors, because you have like 10 numbers and 10 numbers, and you have angle between 10 dimensional vectors, all right? So technically speaking, we're just using exactly the same formula, and we're defining cosine of what we call angle that way, based on that formula, okay? So the cosine theta will be, in higher dimensions, will be just defined as x dot y divided by norms of x and y, right? You can always define it that way. So it's kind of chicken and egg problem, like what defines what do you mean by angle in higher dimensional spaces? So this is what you mean by that, okay? Just to generalize it to properties. And you can think about angles in higher dimensional spaces as like how aligned the vectors are, in a sense. Okay, if they are very aligned, then the angle between them is zero. If they are not aligned and perpendicular in a sense, so looking in absolutely opposite directions, then it's like 90 degrees angle by half angle. So it will have that similarity to two-dimensional, three-dimensional, but it's just definition of the angle. Okay, it's not that we know what angle is in higher dimensions, really. And you need to remember the dot product for perpendicular vectors, which are called in higher dimensions also orthogonal, not to mix this perpendicular for lower dimensions, is always zero, which means the cosine of 90 degrees is zero. So we know that dot product will be zero. Okay, so 0 times whatever will be still zero. And this is how we actually know that vectors are orthogonal to each other, so they kind of perpendicular. You just compute dot product between the coordinates of the vector. And if dot product is zero, then they are perpendicular, right? So it's important to remember because we will be using that a lot, property. Okay, so we have also something which is called projection operator. And we will talk about operators because they are an important part of the theory of linear spaces, where you think about matrices as operators, where you think about matrix as modifying the space somehow, squeezing it, rotating it, doing something to that overall system of coordinates, or mapping some vectors into some other vectors. So it's like a function, in a sense, multidimensional function, right? So we will be able to convert different multidimensional functions into matrices and work with matrices instead. This is why linear algebra in general is so versatile, and in linear algebra you can do all of the calculus, all of the approximations, all of the calculations that you need to do, all of the numerical analysis, like all of that is inside the linear algebra, because you can represent a lot of different things with matrices, just tables of numbers, right? Vectors or matrices. And you can think about vector also as one dimension and second dimension matrix. Okay, so it will be 1 by n or n by 1 type of matrix, which is vector, right? So here's the thing. You are looking for projection, and as I said, it's very easy when one of the vectors is unit vector, okay? But what happens if they are not, none of them? Okay, you still want the projection of y on x, and we will call that projection of y on x. Okay, this is how you symbolically write the projection. So this is what it will be. It will be x dot y, x dot x times vector x. So pay attention that this is number, and this is number, which is just norm squared, right? And this entire thing is just fraction. So this is just scalar number. So it's number times x, which will have the direction, right? So x will be vector, so it will have direction. In any number of dimensions, it doesn't matter. I'm showing that in 2 dimensions, but it doesn't matter in this sense. So here are additional formulas for the same thing. I'm not developing here anything. I'm just showing you alternative representatives of the projection operations that you can do on the vectors. So it's just practically this is what you need to compute to get the projection. Okay, you're just doing dot product between coordinates of x and coordinates of y divided by norm squared of the x, and you multiply it back by the vector x. That's all you do for that kind of thing. Now, since this thing is squared norm, you can use also that formula. You have length of the vector x, you just dividing that by squared length of x, right, instead of x dot x. Now, if you want to convert that into unit vector, if you remember, converting vector into unit vector is just dividing by norm. So one of these norms you can use for division of that vector and normalizing that vector to unity vector. So essentially x divided by x norm will be x unity. And then you still have that x norm out of that square. Okay, so this is also same thing. That's x dot y divided by length of x times unity vector x. All right? Now you can also write dot product as x transpose y, which is also alternative. So I'm summarizing all of the previous lecture, all of the rules that we learned in one equation, okay? How they all alternatives, okay? Depends on what is more convenient for you to compute. So x dot x is just x transpose x. Thinking about that as row vector times column vector, will be dot product. And same thing for x and y dot. So it's x transpose y, x. So this one is a little bit more tricky. And I will show you why we need that more tricky thing. Since you can group that in multiple different ways, because practically x transpose y is a number, okay? So you can also switch that as y transpose x and other ways, because scalar transpose the same scalar. It doesn't matter. So you can do all kind of manipulations on that. And you also can regroup dot products, and you can do x dot y is y dot x, right? So you can switch the order of the variables in dot product, because this is just the rule that you have commutativity of the dot product. Okay, so you can switch all these things. So my point is that I need somehow to extract all of the x's out from the y vector, because I want it to be operator on y vector or any vector, technically, okay? So I want to write projection as something operates on y. So you need some sort of function, and this function will be that function, x transpose x. And pay attention that this thing is technically a matrix. But you combine it as x transpose y, which is a number. Okay? But this x transpose will be row vector and y will be column vector. So x transpose y will be a number. It's dot product between x and y, right? And then I'm multiplying from the left by x instead of multiplying from the right by x. So practically this is the same thing, okay? I'm just putting that x on that side. And I always can do that because it's just number times x is the same like x times number, right? You can always switch the location, but it's like tricks that people are using, that you can switch numbers and vectors any way you want. You have associativity rule for that kind of thing. And this is what you will get. So why this is important? Because now I can write projection operator. I will call it P, and P times Y, this is a projection of x of y on x. Okay, so it's just multiplication of that operator on the vector. Okay. Now we can do simple example here how you project one vector into another. So let me write a few things. We need to copy it first. So I want to do the projection y on x will be, which formula do you want to use? One. First one.
Yeah, sure. Last one.
Okay. X dot y, x dot x times x. I use the first formula, and now we have y equals 3, 4, and x equals 1. Right? So let's put numbers in. First of all, x dot y, so it will be 2 times 3 plus 1 times 4. And then x dot x will be 2 times 2 plus 1 times 1. And times vector x, which is 2, 1. This thing will be 6 plus 4 is 10. 4 plus 1 is 5. So practically speaking, this is 4, 2. This is a projection. Okay, let's see how it works in geometry. Okay, so we have like first coordinate, second coordinate of this vector. So you have one vector will look like 2, 1. So let's draw it. So it look like colors. So you get vector x is 2, 1, so it's 2, 1 here. Vector x. Vector y is 3, 4, so it will be 3, 4 here. Okay. So you need projection z vector on z vector, so it will be somewhere here. This will be the point you're looking for. Okay. And hopefully this is close enough to 4, 2. Okay, this is something like that. So we computed that point and that direction based on the dot products. So you obviously can compute that geometrically as well, right? You can compute all of these angles between these two vectors to do geometry for the triangle, do all of the other complicated computations to get geometrically, like analytical geometry, then you get coordinates of that point. But this is easier. Okay, any questions? All right, so this is the meaning of the projection operator using dot products, and dot products are very convenient for that purpose to match between two vectors. Why this is very important problem and why this very frequent problems that you see? Because it connects also to all kinds of questions of correlation between two different data vectors, okay? It connects to multiple other things in probability and so on. So you have many different applications of dot products to different things because it just tells you how similar one vector to another. And in data science, you need a lot of that kind of stuff where you're comparing two different data vectors and say like, well, this is aligned with that vector or not at all, okay? Or not similar at all. And this is what dot product will tell you, how close they are. All right, some applications. We will talk today about k-means clustering. This is one of the simplest and most popular clustering methods. And clustering means that you have a bunch of points, whatever they are. You want to group them together based on some similarity between them. You find in some sort of a common property to a bunch of points, and then you want to cluster them together as a single group. So you'll have multiple different clusters if you're thinking about these points. And these points could be practically anything, any type of features that you can extract from signals, from any kind of, like different applications will have different types of signals or features. So different properties. And you want to cluster by these properties. I will show a few examples of that. One will be connected to segmenting images with k-means, where the property of segmentation is like you want to outline particular objects in the image, and this object will have something in common for all the pixels of that object, for example, like same intensity as example, or same texture, or same something, okay, that you can describe as a number, okay, as a property. And then we'll cluster these properties. So it's very abstract way of talking about k-means, but the overall idea is that you're converting some data that you need to cluster into numerical values, which are called features. And in data science or AI or all of this machine learning algorithms, you have all kinds of features. Okay, so convert it into features, and then you cluster these features. It's called unsupervised learning in machine learning. It's unsupervised because you don't have ground truth. You don't have any labels to go with these features. Okay, you don't know what the group means. It's just different from everything else, right? So clustering is unsupervised because you don't know the ground truth, and you just divide it into groups by particular features. This is what it means. Is it clear more or less where I'm going with that? What it all means? Okay. So first example that you will see is very basic example, how you segment different images. So let's say you have gray level image with black color, white color, gray color, and the histogram of that image will be looking like the plot on the right, which is you have some number of pixels of particular color, and you have 3 different colors, so you'll have 3 bars on that histogram with these 3 colors, okay? And since the areas of these objects are different, you'll have different sizes of the bars. So segmenting that kind of image is trivial. You don't need k-means for that. It's like you just do threshold, everything less than particular threshold, lower than the gray color, okay, will be black. Everything which is above that gray level color will be white. Okay, done. Segmented the image. So it's trivial, practically speaking, to segment that type of images. This is more or less toy example, in a sense, from computer vision. But many times you have other issues like noise. So we want to use k-means for more sophisticated things where you have additional issues, distractions, noise, and so on, or more complicated images. And what we want to do is to segment that again into 3 different clusters. One big disadvantage of that clustering technique is that you need to choose how many clusters you want from the beginning. It's not telling you how many clusters they are. You just choose number 3 in that case, which is obvious. In some other cases, it will not be that obvious. And we will talk about the advantages and disadvantages of this technique. But here we choose obviously 3 clusters that we want to cluster into 3 different groups. Now we will label them based on the cluster. Like if something belongs to cluster 1, we will label it cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, or from 0 to whatever. So we'll give it labels. K-means will not tell you if it is black or white or gray or whatever it is. It will just tell you number of the group. So each pixel inside that black circle will be labeled as number 2 potentially. Okay, you don't know what number 2 means, but it's number 2. All of them are number 2. So they have something in common, but you don't know what that common means in terms of colors. Okay, it's up to you to interpret it, what it means. Okay, and to say like, oh, this is actually black circle, and not something else. All right, so k-means is not doing that for you. So we will pick 3 different clusters, 1, 2, 3. And if image is not that simple, here I added just some noise. So as you can see, some of the intensities might overlap, like here, have distribution of different colors. So some of them will be in one bin, some of them will be in another bin. So gray and white kind of having similar colors in them, all right? And you still want to cluster it. And there are multiple different ways to cluster it, basically, but we'll use k-means for that. So here's how it goes. This is just one-dimensional k-means. I will start with one-dimensional, we will go to more dimensions later, okay? Just to explain the idea itself, the idea is very simple. So you know that you have 3 different clusters, which means 3 different colors in that picture, okay? Let's start with 3 completely random numbers in the range of the colors that you can get, which is typically in images is like from 0 to 255, 8-bit type of image. So this number's intensities, 255 is white color, 0 is black color, all of the middle ones are gray colors, all right? so intensities. So let's start with three random numbers like 5, 100, and 200, whatever. Just three random numbers distributed on that scale from 0 to 255. Now you're taking each one of these numbers and trying to see each pixel in the image who is the closest neighbor in these center numbers. Like, is it closer to 5, 100, or 200? For each pixel, you just kind of putting them into that bin. Like, is it closer to 5? Is it closer to 100? Just regular distance on one-dimensional distance, right? Or 200. So the group closer to 200 will be probably closer to white. 100 will be probably closer to gray. And closer to 5 is closer to black, right? But not necessarily all of the groups are correctly identified, okay? So what happens is you're doing next step. And this next step saying, after I clustered all of these things around these centroids, attractors of intensity, okay? I will do new thing, okay? I will find new centroid based on the inliers of that cluster, which means I will do average of all of these numbers that now are associated with group of 5, average another average of the group which is associated with 100, and so on. Okay, depends on number of groups that you have. So what happens is this centroids will definitely move. Let's say most of your numbers are not around 5, but around 25 for black, right? So they are clustered around 25 and not 5. So 5 is too black, right? So obviously the centroid will move closer to 20 something, right? So because the entire group, which is closest one, is there. Okay, so you'll move that centroid. So you can iterate, and then you again regroup and finding everything which is closer around the 25 or whatever, okay? And regrouping it again. And you iterating on that multiple times until it converges. So you don't have any new regroupings anymore after a while. So all the centroids will regroup. This is how it works technically. So you start with some points, whatever they are, and you get these black points are actual pixel values, okay? So they might be practically any values. So it's like black is around 0 here, there, then you have gray ones, and you have white ones, okay, with some noise. And this is why you have like different values. But these are red dots are completely random initial values. Then what happens is you cluster it from here to there, and what you want to minimize is that distance. This is what clustering means. So, oops. So you're taking each point in cluster and computing the distance from that centroid. So this is C1, C2, and C3 right now, okay? You're computing sum of all of these distances squared. And you want to minimize it. Okay, this is the procedure, and this is how it goes. You're minimizing sum of square distances practically. So this is first step. Then you have these 3 clusters first. And you, as I explained, you just clustering all these points around the cluster, the closest one, the nearest neighbor. So next step, you're thinking about it as cluster already. This is second cluster, third cluster. So you find centroid of these clusters, which will be moving that point a little bit, that point a little bit, and that point a little bit. Okay, to more center of all of these dots, which is like centroid, center of mass, if you wish, okay, of all of these points. And then you have completely new center of mass. You repeat exactly the same procedure multiple times. So here's how it works. Like, this is a procedure, okay? For each data point, you're calculating how close it is to the chosen centroid, okay? Recalculating the centroid based on the inliers, okay? And repeating the process multiple times until it converges. And after it converges, you stop the procedure. So what do you think is the main problem with that approach? Why it's not very consistent, let's say? It will converge, it will be fine. You'll get some centroids, and the centroids will define new groups, and this will be your clusters practically. This will be your output, the algorithm. The clusters will be your final clusters after convergence. So what could go wrong here?
Too many outliers? Skew your centers?
You have problems with outliers, definitely you have problems with outliers, but this is not the main problem of that algorithm. And again, this is a very simplistic algorithm, and people still use it for million of different things. This is practically the most popular clustering algorithm, I guess. Nothing is more popular than this one. Everybody's using k-means for almost everything as a first try until it fails. But people improved it a little bit because of the main thing of the zero step. How do you randomly choose the centroids? So let's say you choose randomly both, like all three centroids in the white color. Could be, right? It's random. Like all of them are 200 plus. So randomly, you might not even get to the lower colors. It will all converge on this like subset of things, okay? And they will practically converge to local minima and not global minima, okay? Which is dependent on how you choose the initial points. And especially if you have many clusters, it could be very messy. They could converge to completely weird things, okay, because of your initial conditions. So what people are technically doing to repair that problem, they're initiating that multiple times, like 20 times. So if many times it converges to the same point, to the same clusters, then it's more reliable. You can say like, well, these are the correct clusters, okay, global minima, okay? But some of them might converge to different clusters, okay? You just ignore them. Like big measure vote out of 20 tries of random distributions. And then it will be more reliable, yes.
Could you please explain what do you mean by converge?
So again, you have that centroid, initial centroid, right? You pick closest neighbors to that centroid. Based on the closest neighbors, you move that a little bit, right? Because you are finding centroid of the neighbors. And since neighbors were not decided only by closest distance, this point might move a little bit based on inclusion criteria, okay? For each one of the clusters. So these points will move a little bit as you iterate. Eventually, they will stop moving. Right? So they will not move anymore because all the defining points in the cluster will be already in that cluster around that centroid. So centroid will be already the real centroid of the entire cluster. So it will converge. Maybe you'll see that in 2 dimensions, it will be more clear how it works, like step by step. It will show, this is just 1-dimensional example to show like that you can do that in multiple dimensions, to go from 1 dimension to more dimensions. But iteration means that you're moving centroid a little bit. And you have kind of problem with that. Let's say you started with particular points, okay, and you have particular clusters. And then you decide on these points might move a little bit. Okay. We can show that in 2 dimensions, probably it will be more clear because you'll have entire space of different dots in the space, so it will be maybe better to see it in 2 dimensions.
So we'll perform some operation on every dot. To move
dots are staying where they are. Dots are just location, like intensity. So dots, like black dots, are the same. The color dots are moving. So here's the procedure is technically relatively simple. So you decide on location of red, blue, and green dot randomly, okay? And then you allocate who is the closest to the red dot, okay? Who are from the black dots, okay? Who is the closest to the blue dot? Let's say this is your initial blue dot, this is your initial green dot, and this is your initial red dot, okay? So closest to the red dot will be all of these points, right? Closest to the blue dot will be all of these points, okay? Something like that, right? Closest to the green dot will be that thing. But clearly these are misclassified right now, misclustered, okay? Incorrectly clustered because this should belong to the green one. But physically, they are closer to the blue one because you've chosen it randomly. Okay, so initially they are closer to the other one. Okay, so what happens is now you're taking all of these dots and you're finding new centroid for the blue ones, which probably will move it that way because this is more dense, right? So centroid will be closer to here. Okay, and this one is more dense on that side compared to that side, so green one will move a little bit here. Okay, red one will move to the middle of these points somewhere because it's kind of equally distributed on both sides, let's say, okay, the intensities. Now, so next step will be, okay, I redistribute these points. Now, who are the closest neighbors of red, green, and blue? Okay, so in that case, this will not change much because this hasn't changed much. Is it a little bit to the right? Maybe this cluster will still include all of the same points. This one will change a lot because you will move it here. Maybe it will include this one and all these points. And green one will include all of these points. Okay, closest neighbors to green, new green, right? When you moved it to the left. So you recompute centroid again, and the green will be maybe moving a little bit to the left again, and blue one also will be moving a little bit to the left again, okay? Because this part is very sparse here, nothing in the blue here, all right? So what happens is blue will eventually converge to probably that part, and green will converge to most of that part. After that happens, and you have something like that, next computation, you're computing all of these neighbors, computing centroid of these neighbors, it still will be the same point because you already include all of them in previous iteration, okay? So there is no change to green, there is no change to blue, there is no change to red, so it's convergent, okay? It converged to the final result. And the bottom part is the final clustering result of k-means.
Where each iteration is trying to find a new blue, green.
Yes. So you're moving all of those clustering centroids in such a way that you will fit the neighborhood centroid. Okay. Any other questions?
The dashed circle lines, do those represent
Clusters.
the clusters? So, like in the first one, why does the blue cluster so big and then it goes down? Why? So is it just an assumption?
No, this is just random initial cluster. So you just drop everything into random bins. And like what I wanted to show here is actually that since initial clusters and initial centroid points are random, they could be anything and make no sense whatsoever. And also interesting question, like should you choose clusters first or centroids first? It's chicken and egg problem, where you can start with random clusters or you can start with random centroids. Both are fine for that algorithm. Eventually you will iterate and get to the final result or the same result. Some people prefer to start with random clusters, like this first thing, and some people prefer to start with random points, centroids. Doesn't matter really. So what happens in 2D? Let's say you have two variables, two features, right? X1 and X2. And you have some cloud of points, so each point will have particular sample of that X1, X2 coordinates, okay? So here you have two clear clusters. Sometimes it's much more messy, so it's much more difficult to do. And this is two-dimensional k-means clustering. You obviously want one cluster to be colored with one color, another cluster with another color. So the first step, you're just choosing two random coordinates, two random vectors of two vectors, 2x1 vectors, okay? So one vector will be red vector, z coordinate, and another vector will be that green one. Again, completely randomly, right? Now, based on the closest neighbor, and this is just distance to each one of these points in space, Euclidean distance, or any other distance. This will be colored as green, clustered as green, and this will be clustered as red, right? Because upper ones are closer to the red and bottom ones are closer to the green, right? Hope you are not colorblind. Okay. This is bad choice of colors, really. This old slides before I was aware of color blindness. So you just compute for each one of these clusters. Now you're taking all of this like green dots and red dots and computing centroid of them, like center of mass. So you will move red one, red X, and green X to the centroid points, which will be somewhere between these two subclusters. Okay, so this is your new position. Now you're doing exactly the same thing. So you added two red points because they were closer to X, ZX compared to ZX. Not much, I mean, almost no change really. Okay, but now you recompute that a little bit more because this red one goes a little bit to the bottom because of this new 2 points weighted in, and you moved it a little bit that way. Green one moved a little bit that way because of that. So when you're recomputing new things, you have it getting correct, okay, as we expected it to be, because all of the red points now closer to the red X. And then new centroid will be here. Practically from the next step we've done. Okay, so the next step will be same location because nothing changed in terms of redistribution of clusters, so it converged. Okay, and this will be final clusters with their final centroid points, right? Yes.
So based on how these data points have been grouped, just came to mind. So if let's say there is a line between, and then the data points on one side is kind of symmetrical or a reflection of the one on the other side, choosing these 2 points, would they ever converge kind of nicely?
They will always converge, but not always to the right thing. This is the thing. And this is, again, this is like main disadvantage of that method. It depends on how you started, depends on how the shape is. We'll talk, again, I will talk about disadvantages of that method and advantages later. It's very fast, it's very convenient, very easy to implement, but fails a lot, okay? And people still use it a lot because this is very fast and convenient method and works in any number of dimensions. Again, I can expand same idea to any number of dimensions, right? Centroid could be computed to any number of dimensions, which is practically Euclidean distance in n dimensions will be just square root of sum of all the coordinate differences squared, right? You can have any number of coordinates differences squared, right? So you can compute Euclidean distances for any dimension. You can generalize it to any number of dimensions. Vectors generalize to any number of dimensions. So these dots might be in n-dimensional space, which is difficult to visualize, but doesn't matter really. You don't need to visualize anything in 5 dimensions. You just compute same algorithm, all right? And then you get clustering of any number of points. So you iterate over and over, same 2 steps. You initializing random clusters, whatever number of clusters you decided from the beginning, you'll call them C1 through CK, okay? K clusters, this is why K means. So you need to know what K is. So you need to decide on that. And then for each point, you're computing the closest cluster. You're computing from this, all of these points, you're computing new centroid for this cluster and repeating from step 2 over and over again until you have no changes anymore. Okay, so properties of that algorithm, and this is why people use it. These are actually positive properties. It always converges. So eventually you will get some centroids and some clusters. But not always you find global minima here. So it's not promised to you that you'll get best result out of possible clusterings or results that make sense. Okay. Here is just MATLAB code example how you segment different images and the result of k-means clustering. So this is code that you need to write, assuming that image is given as a matrix in that variable im image. Okay, you can call it whatever you want. And then practically it's one line in MATLAB, you're doing all of the calculation of k-means, right? It's like single command. And k is how many clusters you want. So for example, if you're making k equals to 2, you get only 2 colors. So So it segments everything into two separate colors, only two clusters. If you're making it k equals 3, you will have 3 different levels of gray. And these colors that are representative here are values of centroid of intensity. Okay, so you color all of this like white-like colors with that kind of grayish color, because the centroid includes all of the, probably here some gray colors and some other places also some gray colors. So it's all same color, only 3 colors are there, 3 intensities. Okay, so it depends on number of clusters. You can have better and better resolution of colors. Okay, segmentation to more types of colors, more classes, right? Any questions on that? So practically all of that code, all the code that you need is just doubling the image just to make it computationally possible. But you need to do computation in several numbers. Second line means that you are computing the k-means of that image as column. And pay attention that this operator means that I'm taking that entire intensity image, which is like 2-dimensional thing, and making it 1-dimensional, just long vector of numbers, lexicographically, like taking first column, second column, third column, all of them into long vector. This is what this operator does to the image. So this is image as a column. It's one long vector of all pixels in the image because I don't care where they are. Now, there are ways to include also coordinates of the pixel, which means, let's say this image could have all kind of noise, right? And this noise will be incorrectly colored because it doesn't care about neighborhood, like what happens around the particular pixel. So if this pixel is white, it will be labeled as bright pixel, no matter what, even if this bright pixel is somewhere here. Okay, maybe you have like one white pixel here somewhere on the black background. Noise, could be salt and pepper noise. It will be labeled as bright pixel, but it shouldn't be. So you want to avoid that kind of things. And you can include in your vector of features not only intensities, but also x, y, z numbers. So x, y, z numbers of the same kind will be clustered together because they are physically close to each other. So you have like x, y, and intensity, 3 numbers instead of 1 number clustering. And k-means can do like any dimensions, like it doesn't matter how many features you have. So instead of 1 feature, which is clustering only by that intensity number, you can do also clustering by x, y, and intensity, which is 1, 1 value of intensity, 1, 2 value of intensity, and so on. It will be like 3 by n, n by 3 vector. Okay, matrix in that case. And you do k-means exactly the same way. Just put it there and recognizes everything you need to recognize. And you'll segment it much better without all of this like single tiny little things, tiny spots here and there. All right, another example that we can use all kind of vectors is it's spike sorting. So spike sorting is typically done in neural engineering, where we're processing different neural signals, and you have multiple different spikes coming in EEG or extracellular recordings that you have, micro electrode recordings. You have all kind of shapes which look like spikes. It's kind of going up sometimes going up and down. You have all kind of shapes. So it depends on the property of the shapes, people identify particular issues. Okay, so these are features that we are looking for. What kind of shapes you can get, or how different spikes are. And we don't really know what kind of shapes we could get from a particular recording. So we need just to cluster them because we cannot look for a particular thing. We don't know how it will look like really. Approximately, but not really. All right. So we want, for the basic toy example, we're reducing that to only 2 features that we are taking from the spikes. And typically this is how spikes look like. Okay, so you have all kind of spiky behavior like that. This is raw data. After filtering, you get this spiky stuff, okay? And the spikes will look like that when you zoom in. They will be very noisy, obviously, because all of the brain signals are extremely noisy. And one of them will be, for example, like that, another will be like that, or you have like 10 different shapes there, okay, for the spikes. And then you have features that you can extract from that type of signal. And the features that we'll be extracting is very simple. First of all, V peak to peak, voltage between the maximum to minimum of that spike. This is very simple numbers that you can extract. It's like max minus min of the waveform here. And T, time from throw to subsequent peak. So if you have, this will be kind of opposite from minima to maxima distance between those two, okay? Between highest point and lowest point, by the way. Okay, so this distance in time, which means how wide the spike is. Okay, so some spikes are very narrow, it goes like that. Some spikes are more wide. So the distance between the peaks will be bigger, okay? So these are two features to keep it two-dimensional for simplicity. You can extract many, many more features if you want to, and to do all kinds of things with these features, okay? But we will extract only these two features. So we want to use also simulated data for simplicity, simulated data plus noise. And we will have two types of these spikes that we simulate. One spike will look like that, kind of very narrow one, okay, short and narrow. Another one will be broader, okay, something like that. These are two things. And third thing, you will have also segments of noise, just noise. And both of these things also will have noise on top of them. So each one, it will be different kind of spike because of the noise. So you will add artificial noise to it. So it will all look like that or like that. So pay attention that this noise could be huge also, like up to almost 5 compared to amplitudes of 1 here. So these things are comparatively small compared to noise, right? So their properties are different in a sense. To simulate what happens in reality, you have a lot of noise. Pretty huge, yes.
What's the difference between the noise and the pure noise signal?
So practically spikes will be sorted by cutting a window, okay? So you have that moving window, which is looking in that window and saying like, you might have spike or you might have noise. And you don't know if it is spike or noise. So essentially what you need is 3 clusters. One for the spike number 1, one for the spike number 2, and one for no spike, which is noise, right? So we'll have 3 clusters. We'll classify it into 3 groups, not 2 groups, okay? And this is why sometimes you have, actually most of the time you'll have noise windows, which is like nothing, no spikes there. You just need to discard it. So this cluster will be for discarding, all right? This is short code which is doing that kind of thing, and I will not go through all the details of the code, but I will go through overall ideas in that code. You can look at home and you can run that. Probably this will be part of the first dev assignment, to run that kind of code, to replicate the results, to play with the numbers, to see how different things are changing and what you can get from that. These are all kind of helper functions. Before I'm getting to the code, I want to show you the results, to show where we are going with that. So here are the results. First of all, this is map of all the features. Okay, this feature is peak-to-peak amplitude. We define it as voltage peak-to-peak. And this is the distance between the peaks in time. Okay, so this variable is time, this variable is voltage difference. Okay. And these are all of the windows that we had. Like each circle is particular windows that we decided to look at. Okay, that moving window on the time signal. In each window, you have particular peak-to-peak amplitude and particular distances between the closest peaks. And then you get all this bunch of numbers. So pay attention that here you have pretty much 3 natural clusters, which is like one cluster, another cluster, and third cluster, okay, which is just all over the place. practically speaking, okay? So one is very clustered, another very clustered, and the third one is more distributed, right? Now, we don't know which one is which. I don't know if this is like, K-means will not tell you if this is narrow peak, wide peak, or noise. It will tell you this one is +1, +2, +3. That's it. You don't know which one is which. But you can interpret it by looking at the plot and what it means. For example, you have two of them have peak-to-peak amplitude, which is very similar, right? And this means that they are probably the actual spikes, okay? And all of that is probably noise of some kind, okay? But again, K-means is not telling you that. It's your interpretation of what that orange cluster is. Now, one of them have bigger time between the throw and peak, and one of them is shorter time. You know which one is shorter, which one is narrower, and which one is wider based on these clusters. But again, it's your interpretation of what you see in the clusters. All you will get from the K-means is the location of the three axes. All right, that's it. And you will call them 1, 2, and 3. And this is why all of that confusion matrix. Have you heard about confusion matrices? Who knows what confusion matrix is? Okay, half of the class know what confusion matrix is. I can explain what confusion matrix is. You have real class, which means ground truth, like where it should belong. And I know, for example, that one, because I'm simulating the data, I have ground truth in that case, right? So I'm generating narrow pulse, narrow spike, wider spike, and noise, right? So I know which one is which. So I have ground truth. And this is what it says on true class. So each one of them, I know which one out of these three categories the thing is, okay? Now, my K-means clustering is doing some things correctly, some things incorrectly, okay? So some of the labels are appropriate labels, like this, for example, yellow labels, color labels, whatever, okay? But these labels, for example, are incorrect, right? They should belong to noise because they are closer to the thing and not to the thing. But mechanically speaking, they are geometrically closer to ZX and not to ZX. Just by pure chance, random noise, happens. So these are misclassified. So what you see here, you're starting with class 1, and you're saying how many of true class, for example, 1 was classified as correct class, all right? How many of class 2 were classified as correct class? How many of class 3 were classified as correct class? And this is what confusion matrix is. Pay attention, this confusion matrix is very interesting because essentially this number should be reversed. Okay, so this should be like 3, 2, and 1. If you would label the classes the same way as ground truth, but K-means can't. It doesn't know what your class 1 means, right? So it randomly labels them as 1, 2, and 3. So the order here is incorrect order in that confusion matrix. So what happens is that 94 circles of correct class 3 were classified as cluster 1 in K-means output. Okay? It's actually very good. Actually, all of them are classified correctly. But just whatever K-means called class 1, you called as a ground truth labeler, you called it class 3. All right? And that's fine. I mean, this is correct. That's fine. This confusion matrix is actually all good. So all of the 94 and 0 were misclassified on that's like 1, true class 2, like nothing was labeled as class 1 by K-means. True class 1, which is ground truth, nothing was mislabeled as cluster 1 by K-means. Okay. Now, regarding true class 2, it's like 180 were correctly identified. Okay. For true class 1, 180 also were correctly identified. Now, what was misidentified is these two things. So these two things we've seen already here, these two. Okay, so it was class 3 ground truth, and it means identifies that as class 3. Why is it wrong?
Closer to class 1.
Because class 3 in k-means has different meaning. It should be class 1 actually, not class 3. Okay, so this is why these two are incorrectly labeled as that class 3. Now, and 24 here are those orange ones which were closer to ZX, but they actually should belong to the blue one. Right, so these 24 were misclassified, incorrectly identified by the k-means. Because again of the geometric properties of how the noise was distributed in that case. Okay, so these are the results for that thing. And this is how the actual clusters look like when you plot all of these windows together, one on top of another, in time. This was cluster 1, which is noise. And as you can see, it's like all over the place. The darker colors are mean values, and brighter colors is practically all of them plus minus standard deviation type of thing. So it's like variable because of the noise, obviously. So have them all over the place. So not to plot all of the plots on the same system of coordinates, I am just plotting like plus minus particular size around the mean, right? So this is the brighter colors here, which is distribution of different plots around that mean, which is darker color. So this is broader peak, which I call cluster 2. And this is cluster 3, which is narrower peak. As you can see, you have all kinds of outliers here as well, which are because of the misclassification by k-means. You have some outliers in the signals as well, okay? So you might incorrectly identify some of the things. Okay, so let's go fast through the code ideas. So you have some 30 kilohertz sampling frequency, which you can play with. You have time scale for 3 millisecond windows. I'm picking window of 3 milliseconds around that thing. Then I'm generating 2 templates, spikes. And templates are generated here by one of the codes here. It's practically exponent of t squared, something like that. Doesn't matter, it's just that 2 shapes. Okay, so I'm generating this type of 2 shapes with 2 different sets of parameters. One is narrower, one is wider. So I have 2 templates. I'm adding some noise and jitter. So I'm moving them a little bit inside the windows, left and right. And I'm adding all kind of random noise to them to make it a little bit more interesting. And this is spikes A will be synthesized spikes. Again, you have that function here. How you add random noise here, doing some interpolation for jitter left and right. So it will be shifted version of that signal plus noised signal. And you will get spikes of type A, spikes of type B, and pure noise. And then this is how you extract the features. And this will be the features. As we discussed, we have only 2 features. All you need is to extract minimum, maximum, difference between minimum and maximum, like peak to peak. This will be that VPP value, okay? This is the difference. And this is T of the maximum minus T of the minimum. It will be the distance between them. And in milliseconds, you get that times 1000. Right, so these 2 numbers will be in that vector X, which is feature vector. So XA will be extracting features from spikes A, XB will be extracting from spikes B, and this one is extracting from noise intervals, okay? Now, what is left to do is to do actual k-means procedure. Since their magnitudes are very different, and technically what happens is the values in time might be like orders of magnitude different from peak to peak values. And this is typically happens to all the features. And it's a good idea. And kind of if you're looking on the 2-dimensional space of coordinates for each one, like peak to peak value and time value will be in the 2-dimensional coordinates. right? So they might be like very narrowly sliced when you're looking on the plot in the same system of coordinates, because these values are changing a little bit around some tiny number, and these values might be like thousands of times bigger. So when you're doing clustering, it's not great, right? Because you want similar scale, similar order of magnitude for all the features. So typical way to do that is to normalize it by z-scoring. Like, who knows what z-scoring is? Okay, not many of you know what z-scoring is. So z-scoring is very simple procedure to normalize ranges of values. What you do, first of all, you have some range of values. It could be from 0.00001 to 0.01. Okay, and other range of values will be from 500 to 5 million, whatever ranges of values. You're subtracting mean of your values and dividing by standard deviation of values. What happens is that most of the values start to be distributed between -1 and 1, like 95% of values. If you remember from Gaussian distributions, like 95% of the values are within 1 sigma, right? So when you divide it by sigma, you kind of squeeze in that entire subset plus minus sigma, which will be 1 in that case. Okay, it's like from -1 to 1 will be most of the values that you get if you subtracting mean and dividing by sigma. This is z-scoring procedure. Okay, so all of them will be of the same order of magnitude, at least all of the set of the features that you have. So voltages will be within the same range, and also times will be within the same range. This is what you'll get. And this is what the z-score function does. It just normalizes values. You don't have to do that. You'll get worse results typically, resulted. You still can do k-means without having any z-scoring, but it's like good idea to do that, and typically people do that. You choose 3 clusters, and then you're doing k-means of the 3 clusters on the data that you have, which is that z-scored those that you have. And then you converting it back again because you need the inverse transform from z-scoring backwards. And then you're plotting all the things, and the plots you've seen already, what all these plots are. Okay, so practically this is a column. Now, the only change from the previous example, you have start plus replicates 20. This is that thing that I talked about where k-means is not very reliable if you're running it only once. So you want to replicate the results multiple times. So this else to replicate it like 20 times, and you're starting this particular smart point based on the initial assumption. So you calculate like where to start a little bit, so it improves the algorithm a little bit and gives you more reliable, repeatable answer here. Okay, say like don't return the result until you converge 20 times to the same thing. Okay. And then it will be more reliable and replicable. Now, obviously, it will take more time. So if you have like 500 dimensions in your space, it might take a time to cluster that kind of thing, especially for bigger data sets. For that smaller data set, I don't care, so it doesn't matter that much. It takes half a second for all of the code. And this, again, these are helping functions. You can go through that later. Any questions on that example? Yes.
When you are normalizing the features, you combine and normalize together so that they all scale in the same way.
So each one of them normalized separately. Each one of them normalized separately because they have separate columns. So each one is scored by column. Yes.
Yeah. So if you normalize them separately, one of the features is voltage peak to peak. So when you normalize them separately, aren't you putting them on the same scale?
So it will stop being voltage, right? Because you're changing units practically by that kind of manipulation. So they will be just numbers, okay? Normalized mostly, you don't say like all of them -1 and 1, but most of them will be like a smaller range around 0, okay? This is good because you're in your system of coordinates when you're clustering them, they will have similar distances in that direction and that direction, right? And that's exactly what you want. You don't want numerical issues because if these are like super close and these are very far away, this distance will impose, if you think about that kind of triangle, right? So in that triangle, this distance is almost like that distance. This might be a problem, okay? Potentially, and we don't want that problem, and that's why we normalize.
And my second question is in actual data, you don't have ground truth. So how do you know that's what you
So
did?
you don't. The thing, you don't know, but you will look at this type of plots and you'll say, I will call middle cluster number 1 and right cluster number 2. And this will be my new shapes because it will identify the shapes for you, right? All of that plotting that I have here has nothing to do to ground truth that I have. Ground truth is for confusion matrix, but I'm not using it for these plots. These plots are, here are your spikes and your shapes, and you can call that shape in the middle shape A and shape on the right shape B. It's like your choice how you choose it. If you choose more clusters, maybe you'll have more shapes, different kinds. And some of them will look like noise, and you'll like discard them as noise. Okay? So this is how like you just choose how many of them you want. And this is kind of one of the last questions that we have. Why to choose 3 or 2, 4, any other number? How do you know what to choose? Like what would happen if you choose k equals to 2, for example? What do you expect to happen? It's a problem. K equals 2 now. Less than k2. What would you do?
You get maybe a nine segments and then the other.
So some of the clusters will just have part of the noise. So noise will be redistributed in both clusters, most likely in some different ways. But what if you choose k equals to 4?
That noise will also have 2 different clusters in it, or
I think more likely you will have some cluster will be subdivided into 2 clusters. And the difference between them will be just noise because you don't have 4 groups. So maybe noise will be distributed into 2 separate noise groups. You'll have different types of noise and it will be just nonsensical because you have same kind of noise. But this is what will happen. Now, how the choice of features will change your results. Let's say you choose some other features. I don't know, slope. Highest slope in the window. Something else. Or average voltage. It will change a lot in your results. So choice of features, design of features is key point in success of that type of classification problems. All right. And the last thing is pros and cons of that thing. So first of all, it's very simple, fast to compute, converges to local minima, as I mentioned. It's all great. But we don't know how to set k. It's a big problem, really. How to decide on k. It's sensitive to initial conditions. It will converge to different things, depends on how you initiate the clusters. And then also it's sensitive to all kind of outliers. So if your groups are grouped like that, you might have a lot of problems with that type of outlier. And you will not be able to get to that type of clustering and ignore that kind of outlier. And if your clusters are not of spherical kind, which means it's not distance-based, like that, clearly you will not get good results with that type of thing. But we'll try to divide it into 2 separate spheres, hyperspheres in space. Okay. Better use some of these techniques. Okay, more computationally expensive or better. Right? Any questions? Thank you.